I'm Chad Main, the founder of legal services company Recipient, and this is Technically Legal, a podcast about legal tech, legal innovation, and the impact of technology on the legal industry. In today's episode, we talk to the founder and CEO of cybersecurity company Field Effect, Matthew Holland. He tells us why law firms and legal departments are prime targets for hacking, and he offers some cybersecurity tips that law firms and businesses of all sizes can use to help secure their data and make it harder for the bad guys to get in. In today's episode, I have a great conversation with Matthew Holland. He's an entrepreneur that started a couple businesses in the cybersecurity world. He is currently the CEO of Field Effect Software, which is a cybersecurity company that provides tools and managed services to companies to protect against cyber attacks. Field Effect's stated vision is to strengthen the IT security operations of businesses of all sizes and make it easier for CTOs, Chief Technology Officers, CIOs, Chief Information Officers, IT managers, and IT staff to develop cybersecurity expertise. But Field Effect's Matthew's second company. In 2007, he founded his first startup, Linchpin Labs. That was a company that offered ethical, privatized intelligence to governments and companies. So, how did Matt get into the cybersecurity business? Well, he started his career as a spy. Matt's Canadian, and in 2000, right out of university with a computer science degree in hand, he landed an internship with Canada's CSE, or Communications Security Establishment. Canada's CSE is similar to the NSA in the United States. Matt's internship with CSE lasted a few months, and then right after that, he was hired on as an official employee. Within the CSE, he worked for the Tailored Access Operations Group, or the TAO. That's the group that actually gathers the intelligence that data analysts in the CSE analyze. He was only on the job a few months before 9/11, and that's when everything changed for national security across the world.
I remember just working away one day, and all of a sudden, a senior manager running into the room and basically indicating that something crazy is going down, and then a bunch of us piled into the room and into a side room with a TV and watched, basically the first plane had hit at that point, and we were watching live as the second plane hit, and just the somber tone in the room and the quick realization that everything was about to change was a really surreal start to a career, and just the maturation of the organization after that point was just incredible.
So you had been there a year, so you saw what it was pre 9/11. So I assume it did. It changed. It really changed what you guys were doing, right?
Yeah. I think the biggest change. I mean, on the technical side, I can't get into that too much, but I think on the legal side, I think that was where the most change occurred, because the mission of the organization of CSE is foreign signals intelligence, and Canada is typically a pretty cautious country or risk averse country in regards to this area, and actually seeing how that changed and how much the organization and the country had to change its role within the Five Eyes to be a much more prominent contributing member towards, finding out what on earth happened on 9/11. And I guess the rest is history at that point.
You just said Five Eyes. Explain what that is.
So the Five Eyes organization is a group of 5 countries, the US, Canada, UK, Australia, and New Zealand, that have a partnership that was formed just after, I believe, World War II. They have an intelligence sharing partnership to basically work as a single group.
What were you doing at CSE? What is the CSE doing? What's a day in the life? I know you can't talk about a lot of it, but to the extent you can, what's going on there?
Yeah, so the analogy I like to give is it's basically the Canadian version of the NSA, because everybody's heard of the NSA. It's a very large organization. CSE, same mission, just on a smaller scale. So kind of hard to go into specific details about, but I mean, the mission is foreign signals intelligence.
So you're there for how many years?
About 7 years.
And then you make the jump. You launch your own company.
Yeah, so I started a company called Linchpin Labs with a business partner in Australia. The goal of the company, it was interesting because we didn't know out of the gate how it would be received, because the ultimate goal of the company was to create a privatized intelligence company. And at the time, that wasn't really a concept that anybody had really any comfort with. Even large companies like Lockheed Martin weren't really super active in that area. So we saw the opportunity to carve out a new sub-industry there. And basically in day one, we started getting phone calls from customers to start work. So that's ultimately what Linchpin became. We always operated with ethical behavior. And then that's something I think in the privatized intelligence industry, it's not recognized, I think, as much as it should be. But there is a concept of an ethical way to do it, contrasted with other companies. Like there's a hacking team and in Italy, I believe, that was caught for selling things to I guess non-democratic countries is a good way to put it. But yeah, so I think 11 years with Linchpin.
And what was the connection to Australia?
Former colleague of mine, actually, at CSE. He was a person that I worked with pretty closely. I became great friends, and just had very complementary skill sets and a massive passion for the technology and the mission.
So you 11 years at Linchpin, then do you immediately then create your current company, Field Effect?
Yeah. So prior to selling Linchpin, so that I exited from that company. We sold it in 2018, and I ended up leaving at the end of 2019. But prior to that, started another company called Field Effect Software.
So this was at the same time. There was some overlap.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Field Effect Software. It's a cybersecurity company that offers MDR to manage, detect, and response services to small to medium enterprises as our target.
Let's define that. The managed services. What specifically are you providing? You just mentioned software. You're providing some tools. What else are you doing?
So what manage, detect, and respond is traditionally in the cybersecurity world, vendors would sell software. So I would sell you an antivirus license or a network sensor, and you would be responsible for operating those and trying to make sense of what these tools actually produce. Ultimately, that doesn't really work because it requires a significant IT department in your company, which small to medium enterprises definitely do not have, or it requires a measure of expertise, which is I don't know if there's 5,000 really good security professionals in the world, let alone enough to service all the small to medium companies out there. So what MDR is we provide the software, the monitoring platform, and then we also provide a team of operators and analysts that work directly with the customer to learn about the network, to understand the network, then use our capabilities to identify and block threats. So basically, we make it affordable to have intelligence-grade cybersecurity in a company of like 5 to 10 people, which is a really special thing.
And do you have any particular niche that your clients and customers come from, or you have across the board different types of organizations?
Across the board, really, we have, and I think that's actually one of the special attributes of what we offer, in that we can literally provide the solution to every small to medium company and even large enterprises. It works in that case as well in the entire world. So we've got customers in manufacturing and automotive and healthcare, accountants, lawyers. Yeah, right across the board. There's a common need out there for this type of solution. And we took the time to solve the hard problem first, we like to call it, because making this work for small to medium businesses at a digestible price point is a very, very challenging thing. So we took quite a few years to actually build the system that works and is affordable. At this point, it's just trying to help the world.
You say your focus is small to medium enterprises, but in truth, there's no company too small to avoid a cyber incident.
There's no company that is too small for this type of attack, because ultimately an attacker is targeting. If there's something that means something to you, an attacker will find a use for that. And at the very least, in the context of ransomware attacks, they will attack, encrypt your data, encrypt your resources, and then basically hold those for ransom. And ultimately, this can be, again, I guess, a showstopper to a small business or a large business. It doesn't really matter. Everybody is a target.
And you've already alluded to it. And the reason I wanted to get you on the podcast is lawyers. They're a good target. They have a lot of information, very sensitive information.
Yeah, law firms, I think, for the longest time, I think, have kind of flown under the radar. I've been an entrepreneur now for 15 years, and just thinking about all the documents that I've signed, the business dealings and all those things, like there's a huge intelligence or attacker value in that type of material. Like when you think about it, a law firm is basically the formalization of relationships between businesses and people. And the documents, the communications around all of those resources, it's absolutely enormous. And if I'm an attacker, regardless of what my motivation is, so let's say I'm an intelligence, foreign intelligence agency, all that information is useful to me for understanding, how a business dealings work between particular entities. Who are the people involved? What are the complexities of those business dealings? How can I, as a foreign entity, exploit this information that the rest of the world doesn't know, but how can I potentially leverage that? So from a foreign intelligence agency standpoint, that's huge. I think that is a threat that not enough people are talking about. On the ransomware side of things, same type of deal. Like this information could be used for bribery or embarrassing moments or that type of thing. So yeah, I think law firms really need to take this problem seriously.
And it seems to be on the uptick. I mean, there's been a couple within the last couple of weeks. There's been pretty large global law firms that got hit.
Yeah, there's no. It's going to be really interesting to see what type of information actually comes out of that. Whether attackers are just ransomwaring these organizations in order to pull a ransom, because no law firm will not pay a ransom. I cannot imagine a scenario where a law firm's information gets encrypted that they will not immediately pay a ransom for right out of the gate, because law firms bill hourly. So the downtime is instantly hitting their bottom line. So if it's ransomware, that completely, I guess, makes logical sense, but it would be quite interesting to see if there's actual leaked information about business dealings for particular large companies.
So I want to talk about how the bad actors get in, and I kind of want to do it as a word game. I'm going to talk about a couple concepts. I just want you to kind of fill in the dots. So phishing, that's probably the one most people are familiar with it. What is it? How does it work?
So phishing largely is the concept of exploiting social engineering to convince somebody to click on a link or provide credentials to a particular website. So this could happen in the form of somebody sending you an email. The email looks completely legit. It might look like it's from an entity that you trust. So you then click on a link. That link leads to an exploit. And what that is a way of taking over your host, your computer. And then once an attacker is on your computer, then they can go a bit deeper. In the other case where they try to get you to provide credentials, perhaps you click on a link and that leads you into a login page that looks like a portal that you're used to, but it's basically a simulated instance of that. They take your credentials and then they can use those credentials to log into the original portal on your behalf. So that's a different way, and that often leads to, so a lot of people will reuse passwords. So if you use a password in site A, and then it might also be your email password, it could then lead potentially to email compromise and whole worlds of problems.
So you mentioned a term there, social engineering. You said phishing is a part of social engineering. Define that.
So social engineering would, I guess it's the art of convincing somebody that you are somebody they trust. So once that trust relationship is established, then it's a lot easier to get people to do things. Another example would be a financial redirection that utilizes social engineering to convince that an attacker. So for example, let's say I get into your email and I scope your email out and I look at all of your invoices. I get to understand your payment schedule, who your customers are. And then right before you regularly send out invoices, I send an email to all of your customers from your email account saying, please send the money over to this other location. And then all of your customers, when they go to pay you, they send the money to a different location that is actually, my bad guy account. That goes through one payment, and then I tear that down and I walk away with all of your customers' payments, essentially, which is
in the term of art, the cyber world, that's a business email compromise, correct?
Yes. Yep.
While we're on the topic of phishing, social engineering, what's the difference with spearfishing?
I think spearfishing is a little bit more directed, I guess. We tend to use the term phishing in general, but spearfishing is a bit more of a directed approach about doing it. So rather than a mass email, it would be directly at you.
So beyond phishing, another way to get in is the brute force attack. What's that?
So a brute force attack is the idea where you're constantly trying to guess passwords or break into something. A common brute force attack would be against remote desktop from Microsoft. That's a way
for users to remote into the Microsoft-based network.
Yeah, exactly. And actually in 2019, that was the most common way of delivering ransomware, where somebody on a network would, accidentally turn on remote desktop, and somehow that got exposed to the internet, and then an attacker would see that and they would try to brute force that remote desktop instance. And once they guessed it, the password, they could get in and you can control that machine. And from there, it's basically game over. So yeah, it's a I guess a highlight of being aware of what your threat surface is on the network.
So beyond phishing, beyond the brute force, how else can hackers get into an environment?
Oh, that's a good question. The neat thing about hackers is they typically find a way. And being in this industry, I think for over 2 decades now, I've gotten to see the creativity of, the mindset of how hackers can actually get in. And I think it really depends on the attack surface. Really, if you've got a bad network configuration, they may be able to hit a server resource. If somebody double clicks on something, if somebody, in an email, like the exploit could actually be in a PDF that somebody emails to you. And when you double click on it to view it, it could exploit something on your computer. There's an endless way. There's a hacking company, or there is a hacking company in Israel called NSO Group. They were, I don't say outed, but I think they were pretty much confirmed to have this ability. But I believe in May 2019, it was confirmed that they could actually hack into your phone.
I read that.
Which is crazy, right?
Is that the one? I think that reports I read, the Mexican government was using it to spy on people.
Yeah, and it's an incredibly powerful attack. And when you think about that, you could be on the other side of the world, know somebody's WhatsApp credentials, and then just hack into their phone while they're sleeping at night. And there's very little you can do to stop that, aside from don't install WhatsApp. But that's a tough pill to swallow.
But then to close this loop, all the ways you've described there, people getting in, it sounds like more times than not, though, there's a human element. They clicked the bad link.
Yes.
They didn't make a secure password. They fell susceptible to the phishing email. How much of it is really human? We'll just call it human error that provides the entree.
Yeah, you've hit it perfectly. The human is often the problem the large majority of the time, be it clicking on a link, be it misconfiguring a network. And that, I think, is something that goes understated. A lot of cybersecurity vendors will tout that they can stop anything. And it's like, no, you can't stop somebody making a bad decision unless you educate them. We've actually got a platform called CyberRange, which we offer courses to teach people to be better at cybersecurity, because we've recognized that problem. And it's, if you have an organization of security aware people, the odds of you being successfully exploited definitely are decreased. It's just fact. Humans make mistakes.
Well, you talked about some instances there where they actually try to impersonate whoever it is that was compromised and send invoices, try to get money. But obviously, one of the most common cyber incidents relates to ransomware. And I know there's a few different flavors, and I wanted to talk about those. The first one, and I think I already mentioned to it, I think it's called crypto, where I think that's the term of art, it's where they lock down your information and it's rendered inaccessible.
Yeah. So in that case, you can imagine if you're an attacker on the other side of the world, if I gain access to your computer, it's a lot faster for me to encrypt all of your data locally with a particular key, because that's a very fast thing to do. I have my key back in my, in my safety net, but I can quickly just encrypt the data on your computer. So basically, a ransomware attack can be undertaken in just a matter of minutes. It's less about the encryption and it's more about the loss of intellectual property. So encrypting the data is one way, and then leaving the encrypted files on the host. Another approach is to pull copies of the data down and then delete all of the data on the host, or a combination of those two things. And the tough thing, or I guess the particular point where you would want to block that would be on the actual modification of files. So regardless of whether they're deleting, overwriting, encrypting, any of that stuff, it's all kind of the same thing that as a defender we look for and stop. So the categories are really, it's the same scenario where somebody has compromised your intellectual property. They're not going to give you access to that intellectual property until you pay the ransom. And it's the kind of the same operational formula, I guess is the way to put it.
And they get in at a high level. Tell me if my explanation is wrong here. They get in, you click a malicious link, they get into your computer. It keeps working. Your computer's connected to your company's network, and it keeps just searching and kind of like a cancer working through the organization, so until it gets to the root level, if it can, right?
Yeah. So it always starts with a single point of ingress typically. And depending on the sophistication of the attacker, they may just encrypt or delete the contents of that initial host. But typically, these tool sets have the ability to worm around a network. So look for other things that are there, look for other exploitable hosts. If the initial or any of the computers it's operating on has a network share, so potentially, it's very common for a workstation to have access to a network server where you would store files in a central location. Very common for the ransomware to then encrypt all of those files and resources as well. It'll also typically go after a central point in the network, which is called a domain controller. That is a weak point where if they get on a domain controller with a particular level of credentials, the entire network is basically open to attack at that point, and it's a pretty scary proposition. So the key thing with defending against ransomware is catching it early at that very first attempt that it makes to, encrypt or delete intellectual property.
Define 0 day.
0 day is essentially an unknown attack vector that is being exploited in the wild. So, I was reading this morning that Google just patched a few 0 days in Chrome. And what that means is there were exploits or flaws in the Chrome web browser that attackers have been exploiting for a long period of time. And if you don't patch right away, then, it's kind of where the 0 day term comes from. You have 0 days to potentially be exploited by this. The reality is that for every 0 day that's reported, there's always more 0 days. So the comfort level of being fully patched, I always recommend that you stay fully patched, but the comfort level I think needs to be, you need to keep it in check, because just because you're fully patched doesn't mean that there aren't still problems in software.
Explain the concept of ransomware as a service. That's a pretty interesting thing.
Yeah. So this is, I always kind of have a giggle at the creativity or the economic thinking of some of these groups in the world. But the idea of ransomware as a service is you have the technology provider, and it's very similar to every other software as a service out there. You have somebody building the technology and then exposing it in an economic model that allows people to rent it. It's not an unknown thing for public, malware platforms to exist, and ransomware as a service is essentially the next thing. So you can imagine the same way that you would, use M3 or so Microsoft's M365 or O365 tool set for your email or potentially Word or Teams or anything like that online. That's as a service. You pay a regular fee to do that, and the same concept exists for ransomware, which it's mind blowing.
So they're just paying to use someone else's software to infiltrate a business or a user and get money from them.
Yeah, and I mean it stems from the fact that building malware is actually pretty difficult. It's not, I'm going to use a term here that might cause people to roll their eyes, but high quality malware is there's not a whole lot of groups in the world that can build these types of things. And high quality malware, which is ransomware as a type of malware, is something that it's tough to stop. It's non-trivial to detect and block it. So if somebody is really good at it, or a group is really good at it, and they decide to turn it into an economic model that they can sell to other groups, then it's from a ransomware economic standpoint, it makes complete sense.
When we come back, Matthew explains why you've got to take threats from hackers very seriously, because they're often very concerned about their reputations. He also offers some advice about where businesses can start to implement cybersecurity protections.
This podcast is brought to you by Recipient, a legal services company powered by technology. Recipient helps legal teams tackle legal operations, electronic document review, and process automation. Recipient services include managed document review, subpoena compliance, cyber incident response, and also helps legal teams provide clients with process-driven legal support. To learn more, visit percipient.co. Recipient. Legal services powered by technology.
We're going to get back to my talk with Matthew Holland in just a second. But before we do, I want to let you know that if you want to subscribe to Technically Legal, you can find us on all major podcast platforms. So I hope you look for us there. Also, if you want to get a hold of me, you can find me on Twitter, LinkedIn, or email me at cmain@percipient.co. That's CMAIN@percipient.co. Finally, for every episode of Technically Legal at tlpodcast.com, we have a dedicated episode page where you can learn more about our guests and links to more information about the stuff we talked about. All right, let's get back to my discussion with Matthew Holland about cybersecurity. Matt fills us in here as to why you need to take hackers' threats very seriously, because oftentimes, just like everybody else, they're concerned about their reputation. Have you run into instances, I've heard this happening, where the bad actor, put the ransomware in the company servers, actually care about their reputations, so they just want the money and they will unlock it. So going forward, when people are dealing with him, they know that they're going to, stick to their word that if you pay me, I'm going to unlock your data. Have you run into situations like that?
Our Covalence customers, we don't, they don't typically get ransomware, but we've done incident response jobs where we have come in after the fact to help companies out. And there's definitely been scenarios where we've seen ransomware actors that they will absolutely do what they say. So if they say, give me $1 million or we're going to leak your entire set of intellectual property, it's this weird thing where you want to think to yourself, are they really going to do this? Because they basically give up their hold over me if they do this. So, maybe I'll call their bluff. We've seen instances where not anyone who we've worked with, but I'm aware of other instances, I guess, in the industry, so to speak, where company has said, we're not going to pay the ransom, and the actor has turned around and just leaked their entire set of information. So there are definitely ransomware groups out there that you don't want to call their bluff. Obviously being preventative and protecting your network and your assets are definitely the best way to go. But if you do get ransomware, it's this challenging debate as to whether you pay the ransom or not. Like it feels really icky.
You have an interesting take about whether or not you should pay ransoms, right?
Yeah, I think, every time somebody pays ransom, a puppy dies. That's how I feel in the inside. But, it's very easy to have that position when it's not my company being ransomware, right? So I completely empathize that if you do get ransomware, that, all that really matters is you get back up and running. But it does end up supporting a machine that will then go and hit another customer. And ultimately, the only thing a company can do is protect themselves. Like I cannot stress that enough, that being proactive, getting a security solution in place ahead of time is by far the most economic, cheap, proactive way to deal with ransomware threats.
So you cater to small and medium-sized business, but larger too. But let's say you're a small company that has everything in the cloud. So you use Office 365 or the Google Suite. You use some, you store all your files there. All the apps you use are SaaS. You're using Zoom, whatever. You're just the normal day-to-day stuff. Are you safe from cyber attacks there if everything is in the cloud and you don't have a quote-unquote network per se?
That's a really good question. I think the debate as to whether things are safe in the cloud is an ongoing one. We always have it at Field Effect because there's different angles on that. First, you need to trust the vendor with which you're operating. And I would say Microsoft is a trustworthy organization. Does Microsoft have the ability to secure your data? I would say yes. And in fact, they actually have one of the more mature authentication platforms. So when you log into M365, you have the option to turn on multi-factor authentication, which leads me to my first point. If you are not using multi-factor authentication, then that is probably under no circumstances are you safe if you are not using that. You can imagine in an organization of say 100 people, somebody's going to have a weak password. Somebody's going to make a mistake, have a weak password, and without multi-factor authentication to ensure that somebody logging in from the outside of the world is not you, then it's definitely a risk. So if you do have everything in the cloud, I mean, that's a good starting point. You don't have network infrastructure that you manage that somebody could attack, but you still do have workstations, right? So if everybody's working from home right now, we've seen a lot of companies transition from actually having on-prem network setup to saying, okay, we're going to tear all this down and we're going to put it in the cloud. And now everybody's working at home with laptops. We all still have these laptops. So they are still attack points. If an attacker does get on your laptop, the same type of situation would occur in the case where you would have an actual physical network in an office. So moving everything to the cloud, if it makes sense for your business, great, but you are definitely not impervious to cyber attacks.
So that's a good segue. You just mentioned it. You have these endpoints that aren't necessarily always connected to the network, but that's where hackers can get in. There's tools out there to monitor both these endpoints and the network at the network level too. So let's talk about software. What are the different flavors here? If you could put it into buckets, what are the different flavors and what are each one of these doing?
We might need several shit buckets. We're getting into why the cybersecurity industry is absolutely horrible. So there's a concept of an antivirus. Let's start with the basics. I think a lot of us are familiar with the antivirus concept, right, or anti-spyware, and these are host-based solutions. From that, there's the concept of an endpoint detect and respond. This answer is actually going to make your ears bleed, just to give you an idea of how ridiculous it is. Then there's the endpoint detect and respond, which is like an antivirus, but it's supposed to be a little bit smarter. It's supposed to have potentially a team of operators and analysts helping out as well.
And you're monitoring, when you say input, you're monitoring the employees' computers.
Yes. Not what the employees are typing or with microphones or anything like that. You're looking actively threat hunting on the host and looking for things. And then, taking that a step further, there's a concept of UAVA, which is a user behavior analysis, to look for deviations in what they're doing.
But is that really cyber? Or is you're looking for deviation because they're not the ones using the computer?
Yeah. So the way most things work nowadays is they try to establish a baseline of normal and look for other things that are not normal. A lot of companies will call this machine learning, but this technique has been, as long as I've been in this industry, cybersecurity companies, antivirus companies have been doing this. So it's not a new concept. It's just a new sales technique, unfortunately. I heard a funny joke recently that the difference between a cybersecurity salesman and a used car salesman is that a used car salesman will know when they're lying to you. That's how ridiculous it is. From that, there's the concept of network monitoring, which is basically watching all the network traffic. The effectiveness of that is kind of diminishing because there's more and more encrypted communications traveling on a network. So that makes it more difficult to watch the traffic. And then there's the concept of a SIEM, which is basically the most expensive way to create noise. You can imagine all the complexity of computers and networks being put out to a log file, which doesn't really help anybody. And unless you have an IT team to work with it, it's just ridiculous. I'm going to stop now because this is why at Field Effect we've built an MDR solution, because the complexity of cybersecurity for decades has been put on to customers. And the idea of MDR is to say, we'll deal with the complexity. We'll just tell you when you need to worry about something.
Let's talk about, even before you get to that level, an official cybersecurity program at your business. Let's talk about some stuff just to everyday users can do, or companies can require their employees to do, just to minimize the threat. And I think the first one is just education about this stuff. This is what a phishing email is. This is what to look for.
Yeah, absolutely.
Going beyond education, what's the next thing that you would recommend?
Probably more education. After that, we've done some phishing attempts for companies where we take a team of analysts and we'll try to see if we can spoof or get somebody to give us their credentials. There hasn't been a single time where we have run that attack in 1 month and then turned around and run it again in the next month. And the awareness of just the average employee just is not constantly, at the forefront of the brain that maybe I shouldn't click in this link. So an easy thing you can do to actually deal with that is in most modern email platforms, you can, so M365 and G Suite, you can identify foreign domains. So emails essentially that come from a location or a sender other than within your organization. And it allows you just to put a banner at the top that says, external email, do not click on any links or attachments. And that alone is a simple thing to do, but it's right in your face. And given that is one of the most common ways of compromise, it is a way to constantly just kind of remind the employee just with a little, don't click on that right in their eyes, which is really quite nice.
You already mentioned it earlier, but let's just touch on it one more time and explain why people should use it. Multifactor authentication.
Yeah, so multi-factor authentication is the idea where you need more than a password to get in. Figuring out somebody's credentials, like password theft, that's something that's been happening for a very long time. Let's say I'm trying to hack into your account. And somehow I've guessed your password. I log into your M365 account. I've now got everything. But if you turn on multi-factor authentication, that requires Microsoft servers to send you a text when a new person tries to log in. You will get a text saying, with an access code, basically saying, enter this code. And for you, that would be a bit odd because, you've not done anything new. So why are you getting this code? And what that's actually doing is that's that multi-factor. Without that code, you cannot actually log in, and it protects your email account. And that is something, there's different forms of multi-factor authentication. There's the text method. Sometimes you can get an app installed and that will deliver the code, but they're all pretty effective.
Yeah, that was my next question. Absent someone actually then stealing your phone, how can they get in if you have MFA enabled?
So there's a concept of SIM spoofing, which basically means somebody could simulate your SIM card. That's not going to work for somebody on the other side of the world, which is pretty convenient. So they'd have to have information about you ahead of time using an app. So for example, there's an app that M365. We're using Microsoft a lot as an example. I feel like we should get a sponsorship thing or something. There's an app that you can install, and then the code goes to there, and that's probably a better way than using an SMS, because that wouldn't be subject to the SIM spoofing approach.
So you mentioned multi-factor. You mentioned stealing the password, and that help prevent the person from getting in if it doesn't. If you have MFA enabled, reminds me of something I heard you say, that the television show Mr. Robot is fairly accurate. What about that show? I love the show. What about it's accurate?
Oh, that's a great question. Thank you for asking that. Both good and bad, I guess. So Hollywood tends to glamorize breaking into networks with 9 monitors in front of you, with a bottle of wine, with a bunch of music playing in the background, and that's just not what it's like. It is literally a dark room, a couple monitors, banging your head on the table, and then eventually getting a prompt that indicates that you're in, and then it's go from there. And that, I think, as a feeling, they got right. Some of the practical attacks, I think my favorite was, there was one season when somebody installed a Wi-Fi access point. So there was somebody crawling under.
I think it's the first episode. I think it's the episode. He's at the coffee shop, right?
Yeah. So I've done that with a couple of friends like a decade ago in New Zealand when we didn't want to pay for hotel Wi-Fi. So we we crawled under the desk in the lobby, popped a Wi-Fi network link in there, which hit our hotel room, so we can just get the free Wi-Fi on the hotel. I don't know if I can go back to New Zealand now because they charge an arm and a leg for Wi-Fi. But that type of thing, that is practically how you would, the type of attacks that you would do. It'd be something as similar as that, or simple as that. And I think Mr. Robot really gets that right. You
mentioned that, him hijacking the Wi-Fi, VPNs, right? That'll help you protect against that.
Yes. So a VPN, it depends on how it's been set up. But if there's a VPN portal that you have to be logged into that VPN once you're connected to Wi-Fi, and then the outer boundary won't allow anything other than that VPN connection, then that's definitely a way to, I guess, if it's your Wi-Fi network, to make sure somebody doesn't, access the devices or utilize it. But also from a traveling perspective, I mean, everywhere you go, once we can all travel again, everybody should be rocking a VPN when they're on the road, because there was an article released recently, I can't remember what it was, but it actually really got it right, that you cannot trust any Wi-Fi network out there at the airport, at hotels. You don't know who owns these, who's managing them. A lot of the times they're unencrypted, and they're just giant security holes.
Password managers, do you recommend them?
Yes, password managers are a very easy step to take, or easy tool to utilize to get around the habit of using the same password all the time. So passwords generally are horrible to remember. So it's very convenient to use the same password or pattern of passwords, which ultimately means that if somebody guesses your password or pattern, they can then figure out, okay, I'm going to try these credentials on all these different common platforms, and then eventually they're going to get lucky. What a password manager does is it will allow you to create very complex, or it will generate complex passwords for you and store them on your mobile device. And anytime you want to log into a website, what you can do is log in using a single password. Everybody can remember a single hard password on their mobile device, and then select the password for that particular website. It's tremendously helpful because it gets rid of the human tendency to take shortcuts. and actually makes it easier to use very complex passwords on the internet. And I definitely recommend them.
You also recommend rebooting computers in the morning. Is that true?
That's something that you can easily do. There's different
What's
classes.
it do? What's it do when you reboot it?
So there's different classes of malware. I'm just going to use malware as a whole term. There's memory-only malware and persistent malware. Gaining persistence is a much more challenging thing. And what that means is no matter how many times you reboot your device, it finds a way to run again on reboot. But on mobile devices, that's a much more challenging thing to do. So if you start your day every morning and say, okay, I think I've been, let's just assume that I've been hacked, then rebooting your phone should clear out the majority of potentially bad actors. It's an easy way to, I guess, deal with the type of threats that you might have.
So a couple other things. I think you also recommend if you're going to have some Internet of Things or smart speakers, Alexa, what have you, run them on a separate network.
Yeah, absolutely. So smart speakers, home or IoT, those types of things, they're becoming more and more prevalent. And the reality is the vendors that build these devices are much more interested in getting to market first. And that's something that is constantly plaguing basically all development of new technology, and is that going to market is much more important than building something that's secure. Security is always the last thing that anybody ever really cares about in building these tools, or these devices. So what you want to do is put those on a separate network, assume that they are full of holes and problems, put them on a separate Wi-Fi network, then your computers, your laptops, your phones, which is just a precautionary measure. And which, do I think that any of those devices are secure? There's no way. There's color me old man skeptic, but I just don't see it.
Okay, so let's talk about the businesses. They realize the threat is real. They want to do something about it. And I guess my question is twofold. What do you do if you don't have, or maybe can't afford, or it's just not on your roadmap right now, have a chief security officer or a security officer in general? What do you recommend? What's the first step there? And then secondly, I assume this is part of it, software. What do you recommend? Where do you start there? Or is it as simple as, hey, hire a company like yours to do it for them? Like, where do you start? What's the first step you recommend somebody take is if they're going to get serious about protecting and securing their network and environment?
Yeah, so the first step is understanding what your budget actually is, because that's a very basic principle that will wipe a whole bunch of options off the table. If your annual security budget is $5,000, then that's your starting point. Like that just has to be your starting point. The odds of being able to go out and get a virtual CISO are lower. Being able to afford a high-rated Gartner security vendor it's just infeasible, right? So understand what your security budget is. Don't think that you can build an IT team out of that budget. So first step, sort the budget out. Second step, what can you do with that budget? So if you've got the budget to hire a security team, that's fine. But if you don't,
you're talking internal. The budget to hire an internal security team.
Yes, yeah. Which I would never actually recommend at this point in time, just because the types of attacks, it is just way too complex out there. And unless you've got the budget to actually bring in a team of 10 people from an intelligence agency, I'd wipe that off the table right off the bat, because you're kidding yourself.
Because you can't stay ahead of them. You can't stay ahead of them.
Yeah, it's just infeasible. The rate at which cybersecurity industry evolves, you'd need a company of specialists constantly staying ahead of the curve, educating themselves, and making sure that they're on top of the threats that are realistically pose a threat to your company.
But I assume you recommend a point person or someone to own it within the organization that goes out and hires a team like yours, or makes sure that all these security measures are in place.
Yeah, you definitely need somebody as a point person, and I think this is actually why why Covalence, our Field Effects Covalence MDR is such an attractive solution, because we built the entire solution around the lowest common denominator. And so we built a system that we expect to interface with an office manager that knows nothing about cybersecurity. So that is our baseline person that we expect to deal with. And we've built a communications platform around that. And that I think resonates quite a bit. Finding a vendor out there is really quite tough. There's organizations like Gartner that try to classify the different type of cyber solutions out there, but really they just kind of create silos. it's a noble task. It's just you have to have a holistic solution, and putting things into silos is just not going to do the trick.
So you say you really should, instead of hiring a team, hire a company like yours because you can stay ahead. The software obviously goes with hiring you. You have your suite of tools that you use to help monitor. Should people just go and buy a license for a piece of software and put it in use in their organization? Or is that a fool's errand and they should just hire experts to take care of that as part of the service?
So the risk you run with buying just the software is you need experts to run it. So I'm not going to name our competitors, but there are competing solutions out there that have very similar technical specs at a software level. You can acquire those and you can buy them, and you still have to operate those. So unless you have a security team continuously looking at the output of these tools, then they're not really doing a lot for you. And it creates the concept, which is called alert fatigue. You can imagine, somebody calling you every 2 minutes,
yeah.
right? You're going to stop answering the phone at some point because it becomes annoying. And alert fatigue in the cybersecurity context is exactly that. Imagine trying to digest 1,000 logs every 10 seconds, where the software is saying, "Hey, this is just stuff that's happening," and you need to pick a needle out of the haystack as these are constantly coming out. By the way, your job as say the IT monitor of this solution, if you miss something, like, who's going to get fired, right? It is an untenable approach to wrangling complexity. That's why an MDR approach, especially for a small to medium business, makes so much sense, because that is, behind the software, there is a team of people who have been doing this for decades. They've worked at intelligence agencies. They know their stuff. They know what they're looking for. They know how to digest complexity and simplify it in a way that gives you peace of mind that if you ever get a phone call from them, it's serious, but you're not getting phone calls all the time, because most of the time everything's okay. And that's really the difference, whether you want to own the cybersecurity problem internally or hire a company of experts to do it. There's nothing wrong with buying just the software, but you need to this goes back to my original point that budget is so important, that if you do not have the budget to hire and build an internal security team to use it, that software is doing you no good.
Matthew, thanks for your time. I appreciate it. If people want to get a hold of you or learn more about your company, how do they find you?
Twitter's probably the easiest way, at not a spy. It's supposed to be ironic.
And it's fieldeffect.com, right?
Yeah, the company name is Field Effect, www.fieldeffect.com.
Well, that's it for today's episode. As always, we appreciate you listening. If you want to subscribe, you can find us on most major podcast platforms like Apple, Google, Spotify, et cetera. When you're there, if you like us enough, we hope you'll give us a favorable review. If you want to find me, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn or email me at cmain@percipient.co, and that's CMAIN@percipient.co. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, this has been Technically Legal.